I'm sure he needs little introduction, but Cenk Uygur is the co-host and creator of the Young Turks, has been for more than 20 years, one of the most prominent progressive political commentators, and really, really glad we were able to do this conversation. It kind of came out of a conversation that we were on with Piers Morgan, and then that conversation left me with some concerns, and so Cenk and I had a private conversation, and we agreed we'd do a public one. And Cenk, before I get into some of the concerns that I have, I think that it's important to acknowledge that you and I agree on vastly more than we disagree, I think, when it comes to Israel-Palestine and U.S. policy. And I thought maybe I should just give you the opportunity to just say something about how you see the general problem with U.S. policy towards Israel and U.S. public discourse more generally.
Yeah. So there's a lot to get into today, Peter, and thank you for doing this conversation. I think it's really important, and I especially wanted to have it with you because I trust you, and I think we'll have a good, thoughtful discussion, right? And yes, we definitely agree more than we disagree. Now, having said that, I think that we will find plenty to disagree on today. And so what I want to do is I want to challenge the way people think. And if I'm being honest, especially not just Israeli supporters, but I'm going to get into Jewish American leaders and stereotypes and tropes and all those conversations today. And I implore people to have an open mind, because what is going to happen is I'm going to say some things that are going to trigger you, okay? And so what trigger means is you have an automatic reaction, right? Like, oh, no, that's wrong, right? And I want you to push past that, keep your open mind, and then at the end, if you still hate me or like or don't agree, et cetera, no problem. But if you shut down at some point, that means that you got uncomfortable, not because you thought I was wrong, but maybe you were a little nervous that I was right, okay? So I want you to keep that in mind as we go through this conversation, because it is definitely going to get uncomfortable in parts, okay? So now, having said that, to your question, Peter, of like the summary overall, I think what Israel's done so far has been atrocious, and I will use very harsh words to describe it, and I can't stomach it. I can't believe that anyone can stomach it. And so obviously we have the genocide in Gaza, we have the invasion of southern Lebanon, we have the needless war that they started with Iran that they're forcing America to participate in. See, there's one right there. Oh, we're not forcing anyone. Okay, right. Sure. Okay. The fact that Israel is the powerful and the bad guys in this scenario is not even close. So the only question I think that you and I'll have, Peter, is like the degree to which they are doing wrong, right? And I think the Palestinians and the Arab neighbors of Israel have been grossly oppressed and just brutalized. And I think that if your heart is not open to that, you really got to look in the mirror and say, well, what went wrong in your life? Sorry, but that's just, I mean, I would say that in the middle of any genocide for any group of people, okay? And I want to talk about that, and I know Peter does too, about other genocides and comparing. And then the last thing is, where it gets really uncomfortable is when we come back home here to America, and, I want to talk about the politics and media. And yeah, I think Israel has enormous power here in America, and they abuse it greatly. And so I want to get into that conversation as well.
Thanks. So do I. And I appreciate it. And again, I think in terms of our understanding of how profound Israel's oppression is of Palestinians and its aggression in Lebanon and Iran, I think we agree. And I think we'll talk more about it, but I think we basically, our analysis of the American political system when it comes to Israel is pretty similar. The thing that left me confused and troubled about the conversation on Piers Morgan, I really didn't know what to do, because I think that a lot of what you're doing is very, very valuable. And I try to ask myself sometimes the question, as a Jewish person, like, am I overwhelmed by certain fears and anxieties that I have, right? None of us are like universal. We all come with our own particular baggage. But I think the thing that got me in the conversation that I wanted to ask you about was when you said at a certain point, we're sick of Israeli control. They have driven Trump into every war. And then I just thought, I don't think that was an anti-Semitic statement. I'm very, very, very loath to accuse people of anti-Semitism. And I think the amount of bad faith accusations of anti-Semitism has been an utter disaster in American public conversation, and it's been a disaster for Jews. So I don't think that was an anti-Semitic statement. I want to be clear. But I don't think it was a factual statement. I just don't think that there's a good argument to make that Israel was responsible for Trump's invasion of Venezuela. And you said, and I went and looked, like you've said a bunch of times, basically, that you think that Israel got America into the war in Venezuela. And I disagree. I don't see the argument.
Yeah. So look, if you extend what I said to like of all time, no, Israel had nothing to do with Vietnam, right? So I don't want people to mistake what I'm saying. There is no like weird like cabal where they do things that are irrational, right? Like I get the rationality of like Israel cares about Lebanon and Iran, et cetera. They're going to affect that. And that's where we can again get back into the question of to what degree did they influence America into those wars. On Venezuela, that's a super interesting case, right? So it's unlikely to be related to Israel. In fact, when we first started talking about it on the Young Turks, we never mentioned Israel at all because what does Venezuela have to do with Israel? And then we started seeing clips of Lindsey Graham and others going, Venezuela's arming Hamas, and we have to do this for Israel. I'm not like, what? Now Israel's involved in this? What is this? Right? So I didn't come up with it.
Mm-hmm.
We documented on the show dozens of people out of nowhere talking about how we have to do this for Israel. And I'm like, that is the strangest thing in the world. And so then apparently Venezuela and Iran were exchanging weapons or drones or something along those lines. And so was Israel 100% of the reason we went into Venezuela? Not at all, right? Did they tip the balance? Maybe. And if you remember, Peter, of course, you and I had a conversation off air about, okay, Cuba is an interesting test case because Cuba has absolutely nothing to do with Israel. As far as we know, there's no drones, there's no nothing. No neocon has ever mentioned a connection between Cuba and Israel. And so I said that means, I think, that we won't go into Cuba, okay? Because Israel won't tip the balance. And so if they don't tip the balance, we won't do it. And lo and behold, we said we were going to go into Cuba and we didn't. But with Venezuela, we did. So, and by the way, Ukraine.
Yeah.
So that's another interesting example, right? So Ukraine is it majority Israel? No way. Like we had made a promise to Ukraine if they gave up their nukes after the Soviet Union fell apart, that we would defend them. And plus, we're worried about the encroachment of Russia into Europe. So those are all super legitimate reasons. And Russia invaded, right? What we're going to do? We helped them defend it. Now, having said that, again, this is, I find out later as we are, 6 months, a year into the Ukraine war. And I should have known this earlier. It's my fault. Now, when I mention it, you'll go, oh, yeah, of course. So Israel wants Russia to be preoccupied because Russia was helping, in Israel's perspective, Iran and Syria. And so if Russia's preoccupied, will it be easier to depose Bashar al-Assad? Yeah. And it turned out exactly like that. So Israel is very happy that we're in a super prolonged war between Ukraine and Russia so that Russia's distracted and has to deal with their own problems. And that allowed Israel, and by the way, Turkey, to topple Bashar al-Assad and Turkey to occupy northern Syria and Israel to occupy western Syria. So did Israel tip the balance on that? No, because we would have had that war anyway. Did they tip the balance in staying longer, perhaps? Yeah, maybe.
I mean, I guess on the Venezuela thing, yes, there are people who talk about Venezuela's relationship to Hezbollah. Israel may well be happy that the U.S. toppled Venezuela, but it just seems to me when one looks at the long arc of American interventions in Latin America, which 100 years of doing this, right? We toppled the Arbenz in Guatemala in 1954. We toppled Allende in Chile. We tried to invade Cuba multiple times. We armed the Contras. It just seems to me there's so much evidence that this is the reoccurrence of, and Trump even talks about it, the Monroe Doctrine, of something the U.S. has been doing with great consistency for a really long time. And so the fact that someone mentioned that that Venezuela might have a connection to Hezbollah, it just seems to me really a stretch to say that Israel is the reason for this when it's completely consistent with a pattern in American history that goes way back long before Israel even existed.
So, Peter, look, we could debate, hey, was Israel 15% of a factor, 55% of a factor, 35, whatever the number is, right? And if you say, hey, Cenk, no, I think it's a much smaller factor than you think, no problem. Okay, that's not the hill I'm dying on, right? But in terms of the major wars that we are having in the Middle East, Iraq, Iran, every war that, I'll say Israel.
Afghanistan?
No, not Afghanistan.
Because you've also said the war on terror was a quote, war against America's enemies, and the first war we fought
No, not
after
America's.
9/11
Yeah.
was against against the Taliban in Afghanistan. And so again, I also felt like that was an overly broad statement in terms of exaggerating Israel's role.
No. So, Peter, you're right to have this conversation and to correct me, or I would argue around the edges, right? And you misspoke there. You said America's enemies. I said Israel's enemies, and I think you meant that.
Yes, sorry.
Right.
You said the global war on terror is a global war against Israel's enemies. My mistake,
Yeah.
yes.
And I often say against Israel's neighbors, too.
Yeah.
So now Afghanistan in the beginning has to do with Taliban, 9/11, et cetera, and actually throughout, right? So no, I wouldn't include Afghanistan in that. And when I talk about the specifics, I don't, right? But having said that, most of the $8 trillion that we spent on the global war on terror wasn't global at all. It was all of Israel's enemies and neighbors. So Israel wanted us to attack 7 countries. That's, well-established fact. 1996, Project for a New American Century. You know all about it. We all covered it, right? That was before the Iraq War. And the neocons were not at all Jewish, but were they all supporters of Israel? Yes, right? So for whatever different reasons. And did Netanyahu and Ariel Sharon want us to attack those 7 countries? Absolutely. That is indisputable. Did we attack all 7 countries? Yes. So we can argue around the edges of Venezuela. We could disqualify or exempt Afghanistan. But at the end of the day, okay, if you got me on, maybe we spent $1 trillion on Afghanistan, the $7 trillion attacking Israel's neighbors. Okay, fine. 7 trillion is attacking Israel's neighbors. So, and again, Peter, it's kind of indisputable. I mean, these wars have almost nothing to do with us. And Israel keeps saying back then, Iraq is our #1 enemy. America must take it out. And then we do. And Iran is our #1 enemy and America must take it out. And then we do. And we spend trillions and trillions and we lose a lot of Americans. And it's unconscionable. I mean, we can get into the specifics, but there is literally no reason for America to be in this Iran war. And when you do the cost-benefit analysis, oh my God, the cost is monstrous. The benefit is microscopic, unless, of course, you're Israel, in which case you want to be the regional superpower and you want to destroy every nearby country that could oppose you or that could help the Palestinians. So I get why Israel wants to do it. It's very logical for them. And for us, it's the most irrational thing in the world, unless all of our politicians are controlled by Israel, which they most obviously are.
But I don't just disagree with you about Venezuela and Afghanistan and what you say about Israel. I disagree with you about Iraq, too. Israel was not saying in 2002 that its greatest enemy was Iraq. It was saying that its greatest enemy was Iran. And there's a whole series of quotations, both from Israeli leaders and from U.S. government officials, saying that what the Israelis were saying to the U.S., especially from the beginning of 2002 until the fall of 2002, was that we think you're focused on Iraq when you should be focused on Iran. Let me just give you one quote from Lawrence Wilkerson, right, who was working for Colin Powell, who's actually someone I think a lot of progressives really respect. He said, quote, "The Israelis are telling us that Iraq is not the enemy, Iran is the enemy," right? We also have the Martin Indyk, the former ambassador to U.S. Israel. He's quoted in David Corn's Hubris. He said that when he was in Israel, people spoke about Iran, Iran, Iran all the time. The defense minister of Israel in February 22 said Iran is more dangerous than Iraq. The chief of staff of the Israeli military in October 2002 said he's not losing any sleep over the Iraqi threat. I'm not saying that Israel did not support the war in Iraq. Israel did support the war in Iraq, but Israel did not drive the U.S. towards the war in Iraq. It was George W. Bush and Dick Cheney who drove it, and Israel went along with it.
Yeah, I totally disagree. Ariel Sharon said Iraq was their #1 enemy at the time.
When?
I saw a direct quote from Sharon. So look, I saw it a while back. If you want to pull it up, it's no problem.
No, I mean, send it to me. But even Joe Kent has acknowledged, this is what Joe Kent said, that Sharon was initially against it because he wanted us to focus on Iran, but then towards the end, he got on board. This is Joe Kent talking to Tucker Carlson about the Iraq war.
Peter, we all saw Netanyahu with our own eyes.
He wasn't the prime minister when he testified to Congress. He wasn't in office.
Okay, so Ariel Sharon says, yes, let's go, let's destroy them. Netanyahu says, We want you to attack them. We demand that you attack them. And so those are the top two leaders of Israel over the last 20, 30 years. Hold on.
Okay,
And all the neocons are pro-Israel, and they say, oh, we got to do it. We got to do it. Wolfowitz, Feith, all those guys, Bill Kristol, Podhoretz, they're all massive Israel first guys, all absolutely demanding this war. They don't care about America at all. The only concern that Podhoretz and Kristol and Fromm and all those guys had was Israel. So they didn't coincidentally wind up having a perfect alliance on this. And Project for a New American Century was 7 countries, and Iraq was first and Iran was last. And what did we do? Iraq was first and Iran was last. So look, Peter, you could come in with some other random Israelis saying, well, we're slightly concerned, but not that, we're more concerned about Iran, whatever. The bottom line is, they were on a list that Israel handed to our politicians and said, you must destroy them. And we did destroy them. And so you could say, oh, maybe they wanted to start with Iran and end with Iraq instead of starting with Iraq and ending with Iran. But there is no dispute that those are the 7 countries Israel wanted us to attack, and we attacked all 7.
This has been a free preview of my conversation. If you'd like to hear the rest and support my work, please consider subscribing at peterbeinart.substack.com.